I really want to open it up to you all, and maybe you all would like to start and then get to the folks in the crowd, and let's just have a conversation. Thank you.
Jim, did you have any questions?
How about just the first level of question, which is how does Department of Agriculture and Department of Energy work in the biofuels and the relationship? Is we have a lot of activity going on, wind farms in this particular neck of the woods,
Yeah.
biodiesel, a lot of ethanol.
Yeah.
So how do we connect all those pieces together?
Well, it really depends on the end recipient. I will tell you, I think Colleen would agree with this, that USDA is a bit more mature than the Department of Energy is in terms of getting money out the door for investments. If you look at our loan guarantee programs or our REAP program, which is the Renewable Energy, help me, Colleen, what's that stand for? Yes. If you look at those programs, we are able to move an applicant through the process much more quickly in some ways than the Department of Energy does. And in fact, at the beginning of this process, talking about the greener economy and more investments in renewable energy, Secretary Vilsack sat down with Secretary Chu and offered up some of our resources to help sort of guide them on how to deal with applicants and the sort of ensuing mad dash for some of those investments. I'm not going to get into a scenario of which department is better or worse. I think we serve sort of similar interests and similar constituencies in many ways. I will tell you that I am a huge fan of the REAP program. It has done wonders all over the country. It has done wonders right in my neck of the woods. I'm from western Nebraska, which is not all dissimilar from central Illinois, although you seem to have more flowing water than we do. So, you know, from a REAP perspective, from a BCAP perspective, from a, you know, sort of global view of ethanol to wood fire energy to wind, et cetera, solar, we have a lot of tools in our tool chest to help make those investments that would hopefully be beneficial to the constituents. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
You have a lot of programs that helps with small business and certainly with rural communities. We're starting to see more collaborative agency work. How can you talk about some of the things that are going on with the federal government and multiple agencies working with each other and collaborating towards success?
When I first started talking to the Secretary about doing this job, one of the things that we were talking about was program integration. There's many different tranches of what USDA does that has sort of a common thread through agencies, but we don't really think of it that way. And we have, as you pointed out, depending on the way you count, 14 or 15 agencies with a field presence, and then 17 agencies overall, 7 different mission areas. And they seem, at least when you look at them on paper, some of them are very separate. You know, I see your ARS badge on. You don't necessarily think of ARS and the forestry side of things doing a lot of business together, but they do a tremendous amount of business together. And just to get sort of more specific, if you think about some of, energy is a good example. If you think about some of those overriding initiatives that have common threads, you're working with several different entities. So for example, with energy, you may be working with rural development, you may be working with Farm Service Agency, you may be working with forestry, to really build a project around something. I'll give you a really great example. During the conversation that Secretary and I were having, I brought up this REAP project, which Colleen sadly has heard me tell this story probably too many times, but it's an important story to tell, and that is that there is a gentleman that lives about 70 miles north of where I grew up who got 2 REAP grants to build windmills on his farm to power his center pivot systems. And he did that and then also received what's a tax credit from the Treasury Department called the Section 1603 program. None of this is important except it helps me remember the whole story. And he was able to gather up about $40,000 per windmill in incentives to build these windmills, and then is able to amortize the balance of the cost of these windmills over about 5 or 6 years. And he's going to save 52% in input costs because of it. And he's no longer sending money out of the state to buy coal fire energy from Tri-State, which is in Colorado. All of that money is going to be kept locally. And the best news about this is not really the, if from my perspective, is not necessarily just the renewable nature, but is the fact that he's going to be able to survive $2.50 corn if the markets ever make that step downward, which they're likely to do just because of the cyclical nature. So when we were talking about that, you've got this REAP piece, and it's a very important piece. It's a rural development piece. But I started thinking in the research arena, what else is it that we could have done? Could we have, this particular part of Nebraska, not unlike some of parts of Illinois, probably if we had it to do all over again, we wouldn't be farming it. It's very sandy, doesn't get a lot of rain, but you know, the sod busters way back when decided that that was where they were going to plot some land, and so we've got to do the best we can with what we have. But if we went to our friends on the research side of things, through extension or other avenues, we could have talked about maybe some deficit irrigation techniques or talked about drought-resistant cropping. If we went to NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, maybe there is some EQIP resources that could be made available to put in more efficient irrigation systems to even take that savings one step further. We don't think in those, I think that's fair to say. I don't think that USDA thinks in those terms always, where there's communications back and forth between the agencies. We sort of get caught up in our own, I hate this word, but I know many don't, sort of our own little stovepipes and talk about, you know, what is it that FSA can do and forget about everything else. But we really need to have that interaction. One of the reasons that I'm around and that the Secretary wanted to sort of raise the level of the National Food and Agriculture Council is to begin those conversations. Tomorrow, we're hosting the National Food and Agriculture, or excuse me, State Food and Agriculture Council meeting for Illinois, where we're going to get everybody around the table. This is not, this isn't the first. Certainly, it's an ongoing iteration of those types of meetings where there is a real colloquy back and forth between agency heads, so we can see what might best benefit groups like this. That was a really long answer. I've had a lot of caffeine today. I got up at 4, so.
And 2 things of water.
And now, yeah.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I do. I don't even know if it's just sort of a regional collaboration. To me, it almost even goes beyond that. It could be an industry collaboration. I've not read the book, but just your quick outline sort of brings to mind a fact that I've lamented for a long time, and that is, I'm going to bag on my home state for a minute. The model for economic development in Nebraska is still the sort of 50-year-old model where we're going to try to get a 10 to 50 employee manufacturing company in every town of 1,500 people or less. All of those jobs are going to pay somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 a year, and that's going to save the planet. That simply isn't happening, and hasn't happened in my lifetime. And you know, much to my chagrin and other chagrins, is that you have not only states that have been competing for that, for lack of a better word, through various different tax incentives and job creation programs, to some success, but limited success, at least in rural areas. You then have a situation where you're not only losing industry and economic opportunities to other states, you're losing it to different regions of states. My state, it's a huge example. You know, you have Lincoln and Omaha, and then you have the rest of the state. I'm from 30 miles from Wyoming, so you can imagine how that sticks in my craw. So the fact is, I think that there are a lot of opportunities where we can have regional opportunities. I think a good one is not unlike what is happening here on a micro scale, but on a macro scale, we've got an expressway project that has been under development for probably the past 15 or 20 years, called the Heartland Expressway. And it essentially is a ports to plains expressway. There is not a north-south thoroughfare in the Intermountain West and in sort of northern Great Plains. And this project, once it's complete, and it's actually relatively close to being complete, the theory is, not unlike the Appalachian Highway when it was built, is to drive economic development in that corridor. I think that there are opportunities like that, and certainly we've been very collaborative with both of the Dakotas, Colorado, all the way down into Texas. So there's opportunities like that. I think that, though, specific to agriculture, there needs to be a broader conversation about specific to industry. I think we've seen a lot of this in terms of ethanol development, but we've really been sort of playing catch up. I mean, if you look at the old, you know, when I was a kid and my dad was a farmer, this was not called ethanol; it was called alcohol. We're making alcohol, and then it was fuel, and then it was ethanol blend. And the fact is that we've been playing catch up with technology. We've been dealing with sort of a backhanded conversation with the public, trying to, you know, make them aware that this is a first generation program. This isn't the end all be all. We recognize that there are questions from the traveling public as to whether this is really an efficient thing or not, or whether it's just a way to keep corn farmers in business. And not taking a side on any of those arguments, but they're all legitimate concerns that we have to be able to address. I think that, for example, if corn state governors, like they have, and corn state members of Congress, like they have, work within their ethanol caucus or the renewable energy subcommittee of the National Governors Association, et cetera, to start to work with, had they done this a number of years ago, starting to work with automotive manufacturers and component manufacturers to talk about how can we use higher blends of ethanol. You know, we've been having this discussion about E10 and E15. In my view, had we done that 15, 20 years ago, we could be talking about E20 and E30. And where would that actually take us? So the challenge is for groups like this and individuals that are involved in economic development in these small communities that are dependent upon agriculture production. The challenge is to try to find the next big thing and then work as a larger group, a larger coalition to make those things happen. I don't know if that answered anything that you wanted, but I believe that you've got, you know, in my community of 8,000 people, there are 4 different economic development agencies. There's Panhandle Area Development, there's Twin Cities Development, there's the Nebraska Economic Development Office, and then there are the component of the city government that helps with all of these incentives. It's sort of like USDA. They don't really talk to one another. And it seems to me that if you find the industry target that you want and you start that at the beginning rather than at the end, you're going to be much more successful. Sure. So I think probably most of you know this, but just to give you a quick history lesson, in the USDA over the course of the past 70 or 80 years has played a large role in telecommunications building in rural America, starting with the Telecom Act of 1935. That was the add-on to the Rural Electric Act of whatever that year was, and then building up to the Telecom Act of 1996 and now. And the agency that has sort of served as the underwriter for those programs, at least over the course of the past 20 years, they've been called the Rural Utilities Service, which is a function of rural development. Rural Utilities is responsible for broadband, telemedicine, distance learning capabilities, et cetera, in rural communities. The definition of those rural communities, they're a little bit different than some of the other programs within rural development, but quite similar. And the job that we do is both grant, and we have a granting and a loaning authority for those programs. I think that, and by the way, there is another agency within the federal government that does this as well. It's called NTIA, the National Telecommunications Infrastructure Agency, or something like that, from the Department of Commerce. And you would think that, at least in terms of having that split, that there is, sort of a rural component and an urban component. The urban component is Commerce, the rural component is USDA. Not necessarily. Everything in the federal government is difficult to understand, even for those of us that work for them. But the real result of that is, like everything that we do, that we have partnerships with a lot of not only public entities but private entities around the country to help drive this broadband resource into communities. And the theory is, and it's a good one, it's one I think that's been proven, is that not unlike the Rural Electrification Act, when you had electricity finally hit ranches and farms in communities in the early 1930s, you drove sort of a more efficient economy. This is a similar process. There's great stories around the country of small businesses expanding markets through broadband worldwide, and then really being able to grow. The best practice piece is, I think that if you I'll get you some specifics, but I think that if you look at our website, we sort of have an accomplishment list for each agency that would provide to you some of those really good stories about broadband expansion, really all over the country. But more specifically, or I guess not more specifically, but more directly, it's important to note that the partnership that we provide is not just monetary. It's also in terms of technical support. It's almost in terms of long-term development, so that if you've got a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 project, we're there with you those steps of the way. Many of these programs, including broadband within rural utilities, are those that are heavily authorized in the Farm Bill and then not necessarily heavily appropriated in the appropriations process. And I just want to touch on this, and I'm not getting off topic, just bear with me. This is going to sound a little bit shrill, and you're going to think, oh God, this guy's kind of nutty. But I think there's a fundamental problem with the conversation that's happening today in Washington in terms of the budget. It's something that I've lamented for the past 6 or 8 months, something that you all, if you're not lamenting yet, ought to be. And that is the fact that you all, as learned people, as people that are interested in economic development in this area, recognize some of the benefits of our programs. And by the way, I'm not here to say that everything that we do is great. I think we all can point to a few things that we do that are not terribly good. But in terms of broadband expansion and the ability to help leverage private resources or non-federal resources to really have a bang for our buck, I think is something pretty neat. Part of my concern about the ongoing budget conversation is not that we're not in a pickle, and not that we don't need to make targeted cuts to federal spending. In fact, the President has done that every proposed budget that he has offered, and the Congress just happens to have a little bit different perspective on what those priorities ought to be. My concern is that the only thing that I can draw from the ongoing hits that USDA has taken over the course of the past 3 or 4 continuing resolutions is the fact that they don't know what it is that we do. And the reason that they don't know what it is that we do is because we're not telling the story well enough, and that the constituencies that we serve aren't telling their story or aren't recognizing the same interest in those investments. So from my perspective, one of the roles of our job beyond just the sort of program integration is also a communications coordination to make sure that ARS, FSA, rural development, pick your APHIS, pick your agency, are telling a story so that you all get it and thereby your representatives get it. And this isn't a question of saying, hey, we're better than the next guy. This is a question of being able to highlight things that work. And my fear always when I get a question like yours is, you know, the obvious next question is, well, how do we sign up and who do we talk to? And my fear is that if we got you in front of one of the rural utilities folks in this neighborhood, there would be a whole process that we would get you into. And then we may find out, given the recently passed appropriations bill, that we don't have the money to move forward. And it's the same conversation that we've had for the past actually for the past 5 or 6 years, because we just haven't had an appropriations process that has worked properly. It's not a partisan statement, it's just a reality. We have flatline funding every time we have a continuing resolution, and when that continuing resolution happens, individuals and agencies like this gentleman here are trying to scramble to figure out what they can deal with from their backlog before they can do anything for the future. We've got your name, Colleen. I'm going to get you some specifics, but I do want to touch on that for a second, because it's important for you all to know. And I know that you do. It's important for me to state. If I didn't, I'd be remiss. It's really important for you all to keep in mind that these things that are happening can really impact what it is that you do. The couple of programs that were highlighted in the background materials to me, you know, under this current set of circumstances, might not have happened. And we need to be very cognizant of the fact that these programs and these cuts and these things are real, and they're not. They don't happen in a vacuum. They are impactful to planning. From your perspective, given the position that you have, you want to know what tools you have available to you. Well, the sad reality is, from USDA's perspective, that's changed dramatically about every 6 months, because we're dealing with moving targets and numbers. So I just want to caution everybody on that. There's a lot. Look, I have one of my most favorite programs in the federal government is REAP, and REAP could potentially go away. You know, there's a number of these things, not only in terms of the reauthorization of the Farm Bill, but in terms of the appropriations process. There's a lot of moving pieces here. And sadly, from your perspective, or a small businessman's perspective who's interested in these programs, you've really got to be an expert on all of this to understand what tools are available. Well, I think that the relation, depending on the subject, our relationship with the Corps of Engineers is good. We talk about floods, it's tenuous. If we talk about locks and dams, it's less so. We have I think we have a pretty good relationship, terrific relationship actually, with OMB, and I think we have a good relationship really with the majority of the federal family. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't some competing interests here, but in terms of trade, it would be hard for any cabinet official or anybody in the West Wing or anybody at OMB to argue with the fact that we have the highest, in fact, the most historic trade surplus that we've ever had in agriculture trade since records started getting kept. If you add into that the facts that you pointed out, and it's certainly not just this waterway, we have a number of waterways that are ports and dams that are trade impactful, that are crumbling, that are we've got barges that can't make it through certain facets of either the Mississippi or the Missouri, and it portends to be a very, very big problem. The question then becomes, as you know, with the budgetary process, even though we may have full agreement on one side of the federal government, if OMB and the other departments concur that this is something that we need to pursue, goes into the budget, President's budget request. President's budget request goes up to the Hill, and then there's a difference of opinion oftentimes. I'm not suggesting that that's always the case with the issues that you outlined. I think that we have made some headway in terms of infrastructure revitalization, for lack of a better word, rebuilding over the course of the past couple of years, but not to the extent that we need to. It's tantamount in my mind to, if you have one of those major trade corridors go down, whether it's this river out here, whether it's the Port of Baltimore, whether it's St. Louis or one of the major interstates across the country, you're going to see a significant and immediate impact on not only commodity markets, but the ability to get goods and services to the places that they need to be. You all know that better than most because you're in a relatively rural part of Illinois. I mean, just think of a situation where Interstate 74, Interstate 55 just shuts down, or think of the situation like you outlined where this river shuts down. So I think the question is not whether we have a good relationship within the executive. I think the question is whether there is, again, a determination or a compromise between the executive and the legislative branch to come to terms with, these are the 20 projects that we need to do this year. These are the 20 projects that we need to do next year. A lot of you have heard about the potential for an infrastructure bank. A lot of you may be skeptical of that. There's many that are. I'm not here to sway you one way or the other, but that is one of the avenues that the administration has looked to develop some sort of fund for this to happen, because in the normal appropriations process, the funds just aren't being made available. I mean, we're looking at, just to be clear, in terms of USDA, we're looking at somewhere between a 10 and 15 or 17% cut for 2012. That's just for USDA. If you look at sort of the budgetary situation across the government, you're going to be seeing similar. This $1.3 trillion over 10 years that's been bandied about a lot in Congress. This was the debt ceiling compromise. That's a lot of money, and it's not something that I think we're set on. I think we saw a few days ago there's some on the Super Committee and some in the House of Representatives, including the Speaker, who have raised the specter of these automatic triggers are not going to be forced. Therefore, sort of this whole negotiation process is out the window. So I'm not trying to get way off target, but the answer to these questions is so much more complex because you've got a real situation where it's as dysfunctional and loggerheady, for lack of a better word, as it's ever been in my career, and I've been with the federal government for far too long. So I think the point is that in terms of locks and dams, in terms of navigable waterways, I don't think you would find a single person, regardless of their partisan stripe, regardless of the position that they hold, that would say that's a bad idea to rebuild those and make sure that they function. I think that they would have a concern about how are you going to get the money and pay for it. That's where the difference lies. The short answer is yes. The little bit longer answer is there's got to be some changes, relatively minor changes in the authorities that regulate these processes. But the short answer is yes, and that just doesn't go for commodity groups getting involved with locks and dams. It would go to telecom businesses wanting to have a larger match to leverage more RUS resources. It would go to roads being built, et cetera. I just read a terrific article a few weeks ago where an economic development district in a given county, passed a 1% sales tax in order to use that as an engine to fund an economic development group, who then used it as non-federal match dollars for a bunch of grant programs. It's in essence that same collaboration that we want everywhere, but some of our rules don't necessarily allow. So yes, Colleen, and by the way, those types of ideas, and not just in terms of waterways, but really anything, you know, where you see, you know, a change coming in the way that we're doing business, those sorts of things are the things that we would like to hear about. That's why I gave you my cell phone number and my email. You know, think about these things and say, you know, the answer doesn't necessarily have to be no, it just needs to be how do we get to yes. And that's the sort of thing that we're interested in. Well, when I quit this job, I'm going to buy a little stand, a little building. This is a true story. A little building in my town of 8,000 that does not have a grocery store. I'm going to buy a little 10-acre plot of land, and I'm going to grow a whole bunch of vegetables, and I'm going to sell them locally. And whether that's going to be effective for me or not, I don't know, but it's certainly going to be fun. If you think about the local foods sort of energy that has really developed over the past 10 years, but has always been there. I remember 30 years ago when every little town had its own slaughterhouse, and now they don't anymore. Remember 25 years ago when you may have had a dairy on the edge of town where everybody went and got their milk or their fresh eggs. That doesn't happen anymore, but there is sort of a resurgence of it. The economic engine that is driven there can be measured in the billions. The dollars that are generated in that community then roll over in that community, where you're paying potentially people to harvest, you're paying potential canners, you're paying, depending on the type of commodity that you're growing, you're saving money in terms of transportation if you're, particularly if you're selling to public entities like hospitals and schools, etc. There is a real, a very, very real economic engine that can exist through the local foods systems. We have some really good programs to assist with that, and quite frankly, some of these programs are ones that money has been left on the table in the past couple of fiscal years. For example, I use the term organics a little bit different than the technical term, and I shouldn't do that, but I do, so bear with me. Organics, the National Organics Program at USDA, really covers a few different tranches of small producers. One is the small producer, one is the limited resource producer, those folks that may not have a tremendous amount of borrowing power, that sort of thing. And then there is the traditional, I want to grow certified organic vegetables. And in each of those areas, you also have the overriding programs like the Beginning Farmer and Rancher program that would help, you know, an individual who grew up here in Peoria, doesn't have any kind of access to any kind of land, either through leasing or through working with a parent or what have you. It allows them the ability to go out and actually purchase that 10-acre plot through a low-interest loan program. We have a number of those things, but the real incentive it becomes working with business and figuring out where is the marketplace and building a real business plan around the local food system. It sounds great to me, but I don't know anything, right? So when I go do this is really going to be more of a hobby than anything else. But if I sat down and I sat down with maybe some of our local schools or our local hospital or some of the local restaurants and tried to find those markets, those niche markets that I might be able to market to, you know, suddenly you've got a real thing. And there are best practices for this all over the country. I toured a number of very small production farms and their customers out in the Central Valley of California and upstate New York. And just tremendous stories. I mean, the amount of money that you can make on an acre if you grow cucumbers is huge. And the technology exists now, as ARS could certainly point out. The technology exists now where even in central and northern Illinois, you can grow vegetables well into the winter, you know, through the use of hoop houses or other sort of greenhouse technologies. And that too is exciting because you expand your growth year. It's a very interesting part of our portfolio. I think many of you are probably aware of the initiative Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food. That's something that's important to people, knowing where their food comes from. It's actually very important to USDA and to farmers generally, regardless of the size or the commodity that they grow, that to know that their consumer knows where stuff comes from. And also knowing the breakdown of income on those foods. I mean, my dad, we sold our farm in 1982, and we didn't sell it because we wanted to. We were very much under duress. And the reason we were under duress is because we were, at that time, really heavy into hogs, which meant we had 50 sows and, you know, probably 200 piglets, which is a fraction of a hog operation today. But hogs went to 11 cents. We got hailed out twice. We lost everything. But when the hogs were at 11 cents, we were still paying $3.99 for pork chops at the grocery store. And having the consumer understand that breakdown of income, you know, what goes to the processor, what goes to transportation, what goes to the grocery store, et cetera, and then finding out that the producer's interest in those food dollars is actually minuscule, is an important feature of all of this, and something that I think can be shared with consumers and really get them excited about buying locally. The interesting quote that I heard went something like this. There are a number of countries, namely China, that hold a lot of our debt. And it scares all of us. It scares me, it scares probably many of you. But the quote that I heard was, "But we have all of their soybeans." The fact is, particularly as communities relate to production agriculture, in my mind, the future looks pretty darn good. And the reason for that is, sometime this week, it may have already happened, the 7 billionth person in the world is going to be born. In the next 35 years, that population is going to rise to 9 billion. I don't think there's anybody in this room, I don't think there's anybody around the world that can question the ability for the American farmer in all of their efficiency to continue to feed that population on less and less land. So the demand for agricultural products is always going to be there. I think that too, in addition to the food stuff, there is the energy piece. And knowing that we have just an abundant amount of natural resources, only a fraction of which we're using right now for energy, also I think drives a part of this economy. When I landed at Bloomington Normal for a variety of different reasons that I won't begin to get into, but when I came in, my flight path went over 98 windmills. I saw them. I understand that Illinois gets a lot of wind, and that probably is having a significant impact on rates in that area, which then spurs economic growth. If you look at wood, if you look at grass, if you look at all of the conservation programs and projects that we have around the country, those can all be retooled to help drive that energy piece of agriculture. So I think the future is bright. And by the way, even everything that I said about the sort of the tenuous nature of public policy in regard to agriculture, they're going to get it right because other folks won't let them get it wrong. I mean, we've gone through several different farm bills. You all have your favorites. I have mine. And if you look at those that are not particularly your favorites, you know that they were corrected the next time around. I mean, there is a big difference between 85 and 95. There's a big difference between 95 and 2002. That's because there's a hue and cry from the countryside to help fix things. So I don't think there's going to be a public policy issue. I don't think that there's going to be certainly a demand issue. I think that ultimately much of this is going to be driven by consumers, and consumers are going to continue to demand more. They're going to continue to demand healthier. They're going to continue to demand lower prices for energy, and I think all of that is good for agriculture. And I'm usually not that optimistic, so for whatever that's worth. Well, I think that the Farm Bill is going to, let's just look at the production side of things first, the commodity title. I think that you're going to see significant changes in the safety net, but not significant changes that are going to be hugely detrimental, in my view. And what I mean by that is you are going to see a SURE program that is going to make a heck of a lot more sense. For those of you that don't know what the SURE program is, it's the Permanent Disaster Program. Prior to the SURE program, for decades, we were passing ad hoc disaster programs that we were spending billions and billions and billions of dollars and not very efficiently to help sort of build that uninsured safety net that exists. So I think the SURE program is probably going to be made more efficient, particularly in terms of getting the payments out sooner so that there can be cash flow for a next year. Right now, the SURE payments don't go out until a year following the disaster, which is hugely detrimental for people that are dealing with drought or floods or what have you. The second thing that likely is going to happen, that Congress and the administration have at least I think a tentative agreement on all of this, is to do away with direct payments as we know them. And I think in some ways that's going to be wildly popular. In some ways it's going to be not terribly popular, but it's hard to make the argument from Congress's perspective. It's hard to make the argument to maintaining direct payments for producers, particularly when you have commodity prices as high as they are now. Now, the obvious argument is, well, they're not always going to be this high, and that's something that's going to have to come out of the Farm Bill debate. I think with the ongoing economic downturn and the growth of the people living in or right at the poverty line, I think you're going to see probably not big changes to the commodity program, to the nutrition programs, but you are going to see probably an expansion therein. We've got something like 47 million people in this country that are eligible for what used to be called food stamps and what is now called SNAP. And I think that likely, at least in the short term, is going to continue to grow. I think in the rural development side, you're probably going to see, hopefully, an expansion of some of these programs that have really been popular and done great things, and specifically my favorite program, REAP, and community facilities programs, but also broadband expansion. And I think that you will see probably a downturn in conservation, sadly. I hope that isn't the case, but I think you will likely see that. I think that more people, as these commodity prices stay where they're at, there's going to be probably a pretty big request to help break some of these acres out of CRP or WRP or what have you. I think that research is likely to take a hit. I hope that's not the case, but you know, in tough financial times, we're sort of a short-sighted operation in the United States. So I think that it's not going to be extraordinarily different. You're not going to say, oh my God, it's not going to be 1995. All of the support systems go away, you farm wherever you want to farm, and everything's going to be fine. It's not going to be that. But there is going to be some minor tweaking. And I think probably the most significant changes, and probably the best changes that can come out of the current situation that we're in, is an expansion of and a more user-friendly crop insurance program. I think that's going to become more and more important as we have, I mean, we had a horrible year this year for disasters. Illinois was certainly not spared from that. And there's only so much dollars available for non-insured losses. We had, for example, there's a program called the ECP, which is the Emergency Conservation Program, which is designed to restore land when it's flooded, which is a great program, hugely popular. This year we had somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million in need. And right now there's $9 million in that account. So people that have had their land underwater for the past year, and the water's finally drained and they're needing some assistance to get out there and restore it, it's likely not going to happen, at least under that program. And then you've got Congress bickering as to whether they can pass a $5 billion disaster program to help cover some of those losses. It's a very, very fluid situation, but I think in terms of the Farm Bill, you're going to see those minor changes and not a lot beyond
What
that.
about business programs? Offer a variety of them.
Well, I think you're probably going to see a move from the grant side to the loan side. And I think the reason for that is simple. You've got a situation where I think that the Congress is probably going to look at this and say, at least with the loan program, you've got a revenue stream coming back. We've got the ability to guarantee dollars out of local private banks. So I think there's probably going to be a move to that to help leverage resources. I think grant dollars, they're certainly not going to go away, but they're going to be much smaller. We just don't have, I mean, regardless of the way that you look at it, whether you're somebody who is sympathetic to some of these programs or not, I think that everybody can agree that we've got a bit of a financial pickle here. And given the mood of the Congress and the mood of the administration during this debt ceiling debate, which, by the way, I will freely tell all of you that I thought was a bunch of crap. If we're going to have that kind of attitude moving into this, we're going to have to recognize that there's going to need to be some cuts, and those will probably come from the grant programs, I would assume. And by the way, let me just expand on what I just said, and I don't normally say the word crap on camera, so, well, actually I do, but.
You just did twice.
Yeah, I might again.
It's all right, you're making it informal.
Keep in mind that I worked as in the Office of Congressional Relations for about 14 months, and I mean this not as tongue-in-cheek as it sounds. The difficulty in working with Congress as a representative of the administration was hard because we just have some extraordinary philosophical differences between the parties in Congress, and doesn't make one side right or one side wrong. It just makes them diametrically opposed. And when you're trying to put forth a viewpoint that we thought made sense from the administration's perspective, we really didn't get anywhere. I likened it to watching the Democrats and Republicans in Congress. I likened it to watching sort of awkward children try to dance. It wasn't that they didn't like each other; they just didn't know how to do it. It really is the case in terms of this debt ceiling debate. The frustrating thing for me is that it seemed to me that we were having a conversation about already appropriated dollars and giving representatives a second bite at the apple. So you had people like you already sort of down the field making decisions, trying to figure out how you were going to use the grant that you've already been obligated, and then suddenly we're having a conversation about whether that obligation is actually going to be there. And you may already be trying to figure out how to do contracts and that sort of thing, and it's just a wildly frustrating thing. So that's why I say that, you know, and I think that sort of changed the rules. This is not something that had happened before. Not saying whether it should have or shouldn't have, it just hadn't. So we've got this sort of new rules of the road. So every time there is a conversation about anything, it's really put under that magnifying glass, and I think that's not necessarily a good thing. Well, I think that's a fair assessment. And the frustrating thing that we've heard from producers, not unlike yourself, is if you're eligible for sure, you know, you got to wait a year or more to get the payment, and that certainly isn't much of a disaster mitigator if you're waiting that long, and your bank certainly doesn't. I mean, my gosh, if I told my bank that I had an IOU from the government for next year, go ahead and cash flow me, they'd probably tell me to go take a hike. And that's why I think that SURE is really going to be streamlined in this next Farm Bill. I think the popularity and the idea behind a permanent disaster program is a really good one. I think that's what drove the conversation in 2002. I don't think that's really changed, but there is a pretty significant concern when you can't get dollars out the door for at least a year.